talk taxes, because, I mean taxes that you pay, by the way, not that you get in and travel around in, because they are the highest rate now since the Second World War. Now, there's always this debate raging on, isn't there, about tax cuts. Should there be tax cuts, yes or no? Of course, I would say yes. But who should get them? Should it be en masse, all of us, or should it just be a select group? I'm asking this because a Tory MP this week said that under 40-year-olds should receive tax cuts before anybody else, apparently because they're carrying the largest burden, including things like property prices and student loans. Matthew Stadlen, I'm having absolutely none of this. If somebody decides that they want to go to university to further their career and ambitions, good for you. I think you've been brainwashed, actually, because everyone wanders into university for absolutely anything these days, and I think it's a bit ridiculous. But notwithstanding that, if you choose to go, you know the terms, you know the fees, off you go and pay your debt. Why should I, as a non-university person, bankroll the future career of someone that chose to get into student debt?
Well, I absolutely have to say I understand that argument. I think university is, broadly speaking, a good thing. It gives people a further education. It develops hinterland, which is really important as you go through life. It develops all sorts of skill sets. But that isn't to say that people who don't go to university don't do incredibly valuable work. And I think in this country we tend to be quite snobbish about jobs that don't necessarily involve the brain in an academic sense. So, for example, our washing machine broke down today, and we have a plumber on whom we can rely, who's brilliant, and he came round within a couple of hours because we get on well, and he sort of saved us from it. And I have just as much respect for what he does as I hope he does. I hope he has respect for us.
Are you assuming got a degree?
I don't think he did have a degree. I'll check with him next time I see him. I don't think he did have a degree.
That's quite a stereotype, that you're assuming that people that go into manual work don't have
a lot of people who go into manual work don't have a degree, and I do have nothing but respect for people who do that sort of work, which is the point I'm trying to make. If we are going to give tax cuts to people under 40 because they are struggling, a lot of them are struggling anyway to get onto the housing market. Some people are struggling because they are hugely indebted as a consequence of student loans. But as you rightly say, they went into that knowingly. And therefore, if we are going to have tax cuts for people under 40 as a priority, and who doesn't want a tax cut?
Do you think they should? Do you think we should have that?
It would certainly have to be tax cuts for everyone under 40, not just people who went to university.
So
that would be grossly unfair who didn't.
Under 40s?
I haven't said that I would support it.
No, I'm asking you, would you? That's my question.
I think it's really difficult to choose where you cut taxes, because I was at Lord's just round the corner earlier today, first of all with my 8-month-old so he could see his first test match, then a bit later on my own, and I was sitting next to a couple of pensioners, and one of the pensioners was saying that her pension has been slashed as a consequence of the disastrous Liz Truss premiership. There are people hurting almost everywhere you look in this country. As I said last time I came on your show, Michelle, there are almost 11 million people in this country who are struggling to pay the bills. So when we choose where to cut taxes, where we choose where to incentivise, where we choose where to give extra help to people, we have to think it through very carefully, because everyone wants that help.
I've thought it through very carefully, and I do not think that under 40s should get a tax cut. Tell me at home where you stand on it. But Lord Moylan, your thoughts?
Nobody's pension has been slashed because of the Liz Truss premiership. If I can just change the subject a little bit, because I agree to some of the things Matthew says. I do think there is a degree of generational unfairness. There's certainly a sense of generational unfairness, which is a very important political driver at the moment. And in some ways it'll sort itself out for some people over time, but for others it won't. People who never have the chance to inherit a family asset, a home or whatever, for them it will never sort itself out. And deciding who are the people under 40 you'd want to help. Is it the graduates and you forget the non-graduates? Is it people who are going to inherit nothing? Or is it the people who are going to inherit a large family house at some stage in the future? I think it's almost impossible to do this with a degree of equity. We do need tax cuts, but what we need are tax cuts that actually help the economy and help drive jobs and incomes, and will also have beneficial effects on freeing up markets. So one of the things you could do that would help people like that is if you put the stamp duty on houses, when you buy and sell a house, back to the sort of level it was before George Osborne went crazy over it, that would free up a lot of house sales, and people would have more chance of buying into things, because a lot of people are sitting on houses, too large flats, too large for what they need as they get older, because the taxes are too high.
But you could I would remove stamp duty entirely to anyone that's downsizing.
Well, I'd put it back to where it was before 1%, where nobody notices it. You just don't notice it.
There are so many arguments swirling around here, and I think this is quite important, Michelle. The Telegraph, which is arguably our leading right-wing, serious-ish newspaper in this country. I used to have a column there myself a while ago interviewing people. They are leading a campaign at the moment to abolish inheritance tax.
Yeah, brilliant, very sensible idea.
Liz Truss, who I mentioned earlier, she seems to be backing this. According to her spokesperson, she said that she would support this. Now, the idea that we have enormously entrenched wealth in this country that filters down through, or gushes down through the generations when so many people are really struggling, the idea that we would then abolish entirely inheritance tax, to me is deeply concerning and almost sinister. Yeah. Why? Because what have you done to earn money that you are given by your parents? I'm not saying you shouldn't be given money, but it has to be taxed because we've got genuine poverty in this country.
The enormously entrenched wealth that trickles down through the generations does not pay inheritance tax. If you own a huge estate, if you have a large farm, if you're the Duke of whatever and you've got, some huge house, you've long ago sorted out that your family
not necessarily,
will
Daniel,
never have to pay inheritance tax. Inheritance tax is paid by people who have worked and saved and had a family home. And that family home's value has gone up, and they are the ones having it taken away from them, because they're the ones who can't escape it. That's most people. And
so at a time in crisis in public services, you would cut the tax yield to the Treasury, would you? At a time when we've got 7.4 million people waiting on our NHS waiting list, you would take money out of the Treasury.
Yes, I have to believe that the right response, when Michelle says, I think we all agree Michelle is right in saying, the tax burden is the highest it's ever been, I think the right response is to say it should be lower.
The tax burden may be higher than it's ever been, but public services are being stretched more than they have ever been.
Better services by public services.
You can't wish.
By continuing to pour money into them, because we have tried that and tried
Michelle,
it and tried it, and the result is the tax burden we've got, which is unsustainable.
Okay. This is a typical old-school right-wing narrative. The idea that because public services aren't working as well as they should be, that is somehow because we've poured too much money into it. Absolute nonsense. We aren't pouring enough money into it. That doesn't mean that you can't improve. Let me finish the argument. That doesn't mean that you can't improve management along the way. But the population has grown. So even if we are marginally increasing the funding of the NHS, we have many more people to treat. Modern medicine is expensive. You cannot wish away problems to the public services. You simply can't, and on ideological grounds. None of us want to pay more tax in an ideal world, but we have to.
You always sit on here and tell me that you're happy to pay more tax.
He thinks the tax burden isn't high enough. I think that's a fair position.
What I mean is, in an ideal world, of course, we want to keep as much money as we can, but we live in a world where we have responsibility to our fellow citizens. We want to live in a world where we don't have stepfathers or fathers or mothers or children or whoever it is languishing on waiting lists, getting sicker and sicker and sicker because Lord Moylan, for ideological reasons, wants the tax levy to be cut. European countries, they have a higher tax burden than we do, Daniel. You know that.
I've got a very simple solution to this. Yes, I would reduce tax income to the coffers of the government, because if they actually received less money, my argument would be they might have to engage their brain cells on how to spend it a little bit more effectively rather than wasting it the way they do now, because they've got
examples of the waste.
It around.
Give us examples of the waste in the NHS.
I will give you many examples. And by the way, when you talked about NHS, you was talking about population growth and that being one of the challenges on the NHS. A simple response to that would be to cap migration, because one of the biggest growths to population in this country is the contribution from net migration. So straight away, I would look to cap that.
The problem with that is, first of all, it would involve sending Ukrainian refugees back to being killed, Ukrainian women and children back to being killed by the Russians.
Matthew.
And also, we have a labour gap in our market, Michelle. We have a million jobs that are not being done. So it's a difficult balancing act.
This sentimental tut when it comes to immigration, net migration, no one wants to send Ukrainians back to get killed.
So how do we reduce immigration?
Well, that was a tiny fragment of the 606,000 net migration, as you know. And by the way, you led me nicely into asking for examples of where we waste money. Well, you've just nicely teed up my next topic, everyone.